Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to episode 82 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Man, I'm doing a little bit better than you today.
Yeah, my voice is still rough.
Yeah, it's
actually rougher than it was last week. Just went through a bout of strep throat, but we got to get this episode out, man.
Yeah. You needed probably an extra week off or something.
I probably did.
Doesn't help that you had to record criminology.
Nope. 3 podcasts a week is tough on the voice.
It's a bit, but we'll get through it.
Yeah, we will. We always do. Let's do our Patreon shout-outs. We had M. Turner, Clay Sizemore, Nancy Ann Gwynn jumped out at our highest level.
Thank you.
Michelle Schultz, Sarah Canaveri. You know you want to say her last name.
I do.
Go ahead.
Cantaveris.
You just where are you putting a T in it? There's no T.
It's not a silent T.
Is it a hard T?
It's a hard
soft T. Alexa Munoz Aquino.
I like that too. Aquino.
Adam Luke Payette.
Thank you.
Debbie T. Jim Horton. Meg Weaver.
Wait, reminds me of Dreamweaver.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Jane Weaver.
Yeah. Terry Coombs jumped up to our highest level. Rainey Mott. Matt Ryan, Ashley Ream, Claire McMillan.
Thank you all.
Jason, Christine, and Jack Hackworth.
Got the whole dang family.
We got the whole lot of the Hackworths. So we got that going for us.
We do. It's a plus.
Andy Cheesy Rivera.
Hey, Cheesy, what's up?
Tracy Johnston jumped out at our highest level.
Thank you.
Geethan Jolly Barman. Gee for short.
That's a name.
Jason Griggs jumped out at our highest level. Megan Staley, Patricia Tobin, Amy Nichols, and Teresa Johnnies. Now, if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected Ryan Crum. So big shout out to Ryan, been a long time Patreon supporter.
Yeah, appreciate that, man.
We appreciate the new support, the people that continue to support us month after month. We just put out a new Patreon episode on Carla Faye Tucker, which I think people really liked.
Oh, I think so.
We had some support on PayPal, too. We had Jessica Metz, Kate Massey, and Jenna Williams.
Thank you all.
So we love our PayPal support as well. Now, True Crime All the Time, you and I just got done taping, finishing up the second part on the Raffaele family murders.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I like that story.
Yeah.
That doesn't come out right? When I say I like that story.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I mean,
people know what I mean.
Yeah.
Nobody likes the fact that an entire family was murdered, but from a true crime perspective, it is a fascinating story. When you get into, these young kids at the time, they were young kids.
Yeah.
And you get into the Mr. Big tapes and the controversy around all of that. I want to remind everybody that we've got some new merch in the store. We've got some new TCAT magnets that are pretty cool.
They are really cool.
I like them.
Perfect for the fridge.
Awesome fridge magnet.
Yeah.
And they're strong, too. I put one on my fridge, and, sometimes you get those magnets, and they're like wimpy.
Yeah.
And they slide down the thing.
Yeah.
No, these are pretty strong.
These are good ones.
Yeah. All right, Gibbs, you ready to get into this unsolved case?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
We were off last week, so we're back. We're talking about the unsolved murder of Peggy Hettrick. This is one of Colorado's oldest and most well-known murder cold cases. Peggy Hettrick was a 37-year-old petite redhead. She didn't own a car. Most of her activities revolved around doing things within walking distance of her apartment. She worked at a retail clothing store in Fort Collins, Colorado, and was known to visit the bars at night. She had an on-again, off-again relationship with a man named Matt Zellner. And Peggy was described as an artistic, fun-loving person. One of her friends described her as being very similar to the character Annie Hall. She was close to her family and described as extremely ambitious. In her free time, she was writing a fiction novel about diamond smugglers. Peggy finished work at the Fashion Bar clothing store at 9 p.m. on February 10th, 1987. And then she went to a couple of bars in the neighborhood. For one reason, she was looking for her friend who at the time was staying at Peggy's apartment. But this friend had her keys. So she found her friend. She went back to her apartment around midnight, changed out of her work clothes. She put on jeans, cowboy boots, and a dark jacket over a brown blouse. And then she went to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister was kind of like a pub and grill, bar, restaurant, comedy club. It was kind of like a lot of things in Fort Collins. But it's the morning of February 11th. Peggy is walking home from the Prime Minister. The last time anyone saw her was when she left the restaurant around 1 a.m. And it would come out that Peggy was upset earlier that night after seeing her quasi-boyfriend, Matthew Zellner, with another woman. Zellner would tell police that he offered Peggy a ride home, but she told him she was fine and she left the restaurant on foot. Later that day, a bicyclist on his way to work discovered the body of Peggy Hettrick in a field less than 500 yards from the Prime Minister Bar and Grill. He called police to the scene. Her body was found partially disrobed, and her purse was still hanging off of her shoulder with everything still inside it. So this was not a robbery. That was ruled out pretty quick. The body was on its back with the legs spread apart and the arms up over the head. Peggy's right breast and pubic area were exposed. There were scratch marks all over her face, and her left nipple and a portion of her vagina had been cut off.
Wow.
So there was some mutilation involved in this. The coroner determined that Peggy had been stabbed in the back with a serrated knife with a 5-inch blade. They determined that the nipple and part of her vagina was removed with a very sharp instrument. They thought it was probably something like a scalpel. And the other thing that they were able to determine was that the wounds were made by a left-handed person. Police began their investigation, which included canvassing the neighborhood around the area where the body had been found. And they quickly discovered, Gibbs, a large pool of blood on the corner of the street by the field. Within this pool of blood was a cigarette butt that they would later determine belonged to Peggy Hettrick.
How excited as an investigator would you have been to get that cigarette butt at first, because it could have been the potential DNA of whoever did this to her.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure where you were going with that, but yeah, I get you thinking this was the murderer's cigarette.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it was determined to be hers, though. So the theory of the attack, as authorities started to put it together, was Peggy was attacked from behind while she was walking home at this exact spot where the large pool of blood was found. Then there was a blood trail that indicated the body was dragged over 100 feet.
That's quite a distance.
It's quite a ways to drag a human body into the field to the location where it was found. So they've got a lot of information already. Investigators took casts of footprints and tire tracks at the scene. Tim Masters was a 15-year-old sophomore high school student whose bedroom window looked out over the crime scene. And as police were canvassing the neighborhood, they questioned Tim's father, Clyde, and he told them that he saw Tim walk into the field that morning, which was not his normal route to catch the school bus. So this is all happening very quickly, right? That same morning, they get a tip from a father that, hey, my son was in that field this morning. I don't know why. It's not normal for him to go that way. So by 10 a.m. that morning, the police were at Tim's school. They pulled him out of class. and questioned him. And right away, Tim said he knew why they were there to talk with him. It had been bothering him all morning. So you talk about Gibbs, an investigator, getting, I don't know if excited is the right word, but getting, jazzed up that they're about ready to break something wide open.
Yeah.
Hey, this kid is saying, yeah, hey, I knew why you were going to come talk to me. It's been bothering me.
It was just a matter of time.
Right.
Yeah.
But Tim goes on to tell the police that he saw a body in the field that morning, but he didn't tell anyone about it. At first, he said he thought it was a mannequin, but then later on, he said he thought it was some type of trick, and he didn't tell anybody because he thought kids would make fun of him. But either way, police were very suspicious of the fact that he didn't report this body. Police also found a footprint in the blood near where the body was in the field that matched up to Tim. He said he was there. The footprint puts him there. And Tim was also left-handed. So you take all of this as a whole, and police were focusing in on Tim Masters as the prime suspect in the murder of Peggy Hettrick.
Did you just make fun of left-handers?
No. I know
Okay.
you're left-handed.
I was just wondering.
I'm saying the coroner had already determined that the wounds were made by a left-handed person and that Tim Masters is left-handed.
All right.
I wasn't talking down about left-handers. I do sometimes. You know
Sometimes
that.
you do.
There have been studies talking about how the percentages of left-handed people versus criminals and or artistic people, it can go either way. So you can either be very creative or you can be a criminal.
Can I be a creative criminal?
And you can be a creative criminal.
There you go.
And somewhere in between.
Yeah, exactly.
But if I remember correctly, there are a high number, I shouldn't say a high number, it's a percentage, right?
Yeah.
A high percentage of criminals are left-handed. Higher than the percentage of people that are left-handed. It's abnormal that way for some reason.
Yeah.
I saw a study about it sometime. Or maybe I'm making the whole thing up.
You sure it's not the study I wrote?
Oh, it could be the study that you wrote and published.
Yeah.
As part of your doctorate dissertation.
Yeah, exactly. Left-handed. Why treat us so bad?
Is that what you named it?
Yeah.
As you were, remind us again what that doctorate was in.
It was in kineology.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
Exactly. So just the next day, February 12th, they start to conduct searches. And I can't emphasize enough, this is happening very quickly. But they're getting information quickly. They searched Tim's locker, they searched his backpack, and they got consent to search his bedroom. And police would find some things that would make them even more suspicious. In his bedroom, they found a large number of knives and swords. One survival knife in particular, it was one of those Rambo knives, Gibbs. You remember Rambo?
Oh, yeah.
And that survival knife he had.
Cool.
Did you ever have one of those?
I do.
Oh, you still do?
Yeah.
Oh,
and then I got my K-bar, man, which is the ultimate.
That is the ultimate.
Yeah.
Now, back in the day, they used to make a lot of like cheap Rambo type knives. And I remember I wanted one so bad. So I was at the flea market and I picked one up for probably next to nothing because it was some knockoff
type brand.
Yeah, I mean, it probably wasn't even a brand, but it was the big, it had a big ass blade on it. It had the hollow handle where you screwed the, had a compass on the end of it. You screwed that off, which was the cap. And then inside you would have all kinds of survival stuff, fishing line and a hook and a needle and thread. And I don't know, just all kinds of stuff that was in there.
Things you would need.
Things you might need. I ended up trading mine to this kid in the neighborhood for a Reggie Jackson rookie card, which at the time I think was worth about $300.
I was going to say, how'd that pan out for you?
Didn't pan out well because somebody stole the baseball card and a whole bunch of other. I used to have a massive baseball card collection, but at the time it was a hell of a trade because it's like a $10 knife, that I traded to this kid that didn't know any better for this expensive baseball card. But the thing about this particular survival knife that was found in Tim's room, it had the hollow handle, but inside of the handle, there was a scalpel. It doesn't sound good when the coroner is saying the mutilations made to Peggy Hettrick's body were most likely made by a scalpel.
That's not good at all.
No. They also found, some pornographic material in his bedroom. Now, is that out of the ordinary for a 15-year-old kid?
No, you had some.
I probably had some under the bed.
National Geographic.
I wouldn't actually call that pornographic, but... So we say things aren't looking good for Tim Masters, but this is not even the most damaging things that they find. Probably what piqued the interest of police the most were some drawings and writings they found in several different locations. And we're not talking about doodles here, Gibbs. We're not talking about journal essays. These are extremely graphic writings and drawings. They involve violence, and many of them depicted this exact type of survival knife that we were talking about that had the serrated blade that was thought maybe could have been used in the attack. And many of these centered around violence against women in particular. Now, I don't want to fast forward too much, but this case against Tim is going to drag on for many years. When it's all said and done, the police would have over 2,200 documents that were written or drawn by his hand.
Oh, wow. That's quite a bit.
All of this same type of violent, sexual fantasy, crimes against women. Again, like we said, not looking good when you're looking at this stuff on paper. During the search, they checked his sink for blood and found a hand-drawn map of where the body was located, as well as a newspaper article about it. And this is a newspaper article that must have just come out the day before, the day the murders happened, because this is all happening so quickly. But what was not found was also very important. They didn't find any trace of Peggy Hettrick's blood in his sink, shower, on any of his knives, and he had quite a few of them, on his clothing, or anywhere else for that matter. Hairs and fingerprints were found on the body of Peggy Hettrick, but none of them matched Tim Masters. But what police do have is causing them to zero in on Tim as the main suspect. They take him down to the station, and they questioned him for hours without an adult present.
We're not stupid. We didn't bring you in this room because we're taking a wild guess out of the dark. Do you seriously think we'd waste our time doing that? Would we bring you in here without some kind of proof? Did we collect this for nothing? Did we go through your room and find all these neat things about you for nothing and all these knives? Seriously. Am I making sense or not? Tell me.
Yeah.
You're pretty good with knives, aren't you?
What do you mean?
Well, you know how to use them. You wouldn't be collecting if you didn't know how to use them.
I just like to collect them.
You're doing any trapping or skinning or anything like that of animals? You ever went hunting?
No.
What's this? Who's dying there?
I don't know.
Well, you drew it.
I draw a lot of pictures like
Okay,
that.
well, you can remember that drawing. What is it?
Just that the guy didn't saw it up.
Didn't saw it up. What's up there?
The blade.
They saw it up. You ever think about how you always think about killing? Torturing? Knives? Someone hanging? Women? Isn't that unusual? You know? I want to clear this up. In your mind. It's clear in our mind. You got to come to grips with yourself. It's important you tell the truth.
I have told the truth.
You got a dead girl. Okay. She's dead. She's dead. Can you dig what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She has lost her life. She has no more freedom. She can't do a thing. Her life is ended. You scared a lot of people. You scared me. I didn't sleep last night. I slept about 2 hours. You scared the hell out of me. Thank God we found you. Half the detective bureau, half my people lost all their sleep last night. We're trying to find you. Put the puzzle together. We knew who you were, but we have to put the evidence together. Things like this. Searching your room, notes. Getting a psychological profile about you. Come to grips.
What you think about all this? What you think about the people that... Tell me what's going on in here all day since I haven't been here.
Well, they're pretty much sure that I did it.
Why are they sure you did it?
Because all the evidence points towards me, I guess.
Well, as I understand it, you're the one that found the victim down there, is that right?
Yeah.
When you stood over the body, didn't you?
Stick pretty close to it.
Did you touch anything? What did you notice? Tell me what you saw.
I noticed that the pants were down.
Okay. Were you able to see the pubic area? You know what I mean when I say
Yeah.
pubic area, the vaginal area?
All I seen was her hair.
Okay. Anything else you saw?
Nothing except for that blood trail.
Where did that come from?
The street.
You have a lot of pictures of killing women, don't you? Pictures you've drawn?
I do.
Don't
Not
you?
just women.
Huh?
Not just women.
Not just women, but you do have pictures of women being killed, don't you?
Yeah, I guess I do somewhere.
Is that alright? Should I draw any conclusion by that?
No.
I mean, you're kind of interested in blood, aren't you? At least, you know, based on what I've seen and some of the stuff you've written and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess so.
What do you mean you guess so? Can you tell me a little more about that? I mean, either you are or you aren't.
Mostly I was just drawing it in class.
Yeah,
Showed it to friends.
but it's all about death and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you know, you have all those knives and stuff. Don't you do anything with your knives anymore?
I like to collect knives.
And what else do you do with them?
I don't do much of anything.
You just collect them?
I use them when I go hiking for stuff.
What do you use them for?
Like cutting wood and stuff.
I mean, it's more than just a whittling knife or like a buck knife or something like that, right? They're designed for killing people, right? Okay. And you still play with those knives. I don't want to use play. You still have those knives, right? And you still have them around your room, don't you?
Yeah,
And why do you have them around your room?
because I like them.
Just to look at them? Do you use them at all? Do you ever
Every once in a while I use them.
Okay. Use them for skinning anything?
No.
If I was sitting in that chair and you were sitting here, what would you be thinking? If you asked me a
All
question,
the evidence looks against me.
but is it right or wrong?
It's wrong.
Why?
Because I didn't kill her.
So I know that was a long audio clip, but I just thought the information in there was too good not to put out. You know, you heard two different investigators questioning 15-year-old Tim Masters, and you can hear Gibbs in those interviews how much emphasis they're putting on the knives, on the drawings. It almost sounded like they were playing good cop, bad cop. The first guy was a little more forceful. The second guy was a little more laid back. I mean, he's still asking many of the same questions. Now, police put together that Peggy Hettrick bore a resemblance to Tim's mother, who had died 4 years earlier. And Peggy was murdered almost 4 years to the death of his mother. When they searched Tim's backpack, they found some Mother's Day cards in it. And they also found his mother's death certificate in his room. So, I mean, none of this is smoking gun type stuff, but you can see how they're mounting a lot of circumstantial evidence that, as we said before, does not look good for Tim Masters. But Tim took a lie detector test, but apparently the results were inconclusive. But to me, the key here is that through all the interviews, through all the accusations, Tim Masters maintained his innocence. I actually felt in those interviews, for a 15-year-old kid, he was actually pretty composed.
He sounded like it.
I mean, he was answering their questions. He didn't sound like he was trying to dodge anything. So they have all this circumstantial evidence, but they really had no physical or direct evidence. And as a result of that, they were not able to charge Tim Masters with the murder of Peggy Hettrick. But that doesn't mean that he slipped off their radar. He was still their main suspect. They brought in the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, who had this idea that they thought would provoke Tim. And the idea was to give misinformation to the local paper and have them print it. At the same time, they were doing continuous surveillance on Tim, but this didn't provoke any type of reaction or response from him. I guess that's what they were hoping that it would do.
Right. But it didn't do anything. It didn't change his behavior at all. So we fast forward in time. Tim Masters graduated high school, and then he went on to join the Navy. Then in 1992, a person that went to high school with Tim back in the day told police that he bragged about the mutilations in school after the murder happened. He was in Philadelphia at this time, so police traveled there with a warrant to arrest Tim Masters. But they decided against it after they talked with him. You know, he admitted to police that he knew about the mutilations to Peggy Hettrick's body, but he said he learned about them from a girl in his class who was a police explorer scout. And I really don't know what that is, Gibbs. I'm assuming it's like where a young person does stuff for the police or, I don't know, gets some early training. I really have no idea. Early training.
I mean, Tim went on to say that she told everyone in class about the details. So apparently, because she was this police explorer scout, she had a little more access to information than the general public. Then we jump to 1995. So we're 8 years after the murder, but Tim Masters is still the prime suspect in the eyes of the police. The Fort Collins Detective Bureau was restructured, and it was done so in order to give investigators more time to work cold cases. And over the next couple of years, they started to get into the field of research around sexual homicides. And it was in 1997 that they contacted a forensic psychologist by the name of Dr. Reed Malloy. And this guy was an expert in sexual homicide. And they contracted with him to consult on this case. And this entire time, they are working to build a case against Tim Masters based on the theory that he murdered Peggy Hettrick in what they thought was a sexual homicide. And they had this Dr. Malloy look over all the evidence that they had. So the drawings, the writings, and he came to the conclusion that Tim Masters was the most likely killer of Peggy Hettrick. Now, I don't know, Gibbs. I mean, you look at a couple of thousand violent drawings and writings, how could you not think that this guy is?
Yeah, I think naturally you're going to think that. I mean, how couldn't you after viewing those, different drawings that he did?
By 1998, Masters was in his mid-20s and was living in California. It had been 11 years since the murder of Peggy Hettrick. Police arrested Tim Masters at his home on a warrant for first-degree murder. 11 years has gone by, and now they arrest him.
And the funny thing is, it's not really funny, but when they search his place, they find more of the same type of drawings. The same type of drawings that he did when he was 15.
He's now doing it 25, 26.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's still...
And it's one of the reasons why I had to say I didn't want to fast forward, but in the end, right, they would have 2,000, 2,200 drawings.
So they found a number of them when they did the initial searches in 1987. Then they find another stash of them now in 1998. But you're right, they were very similar. The writing style and the drawing style and the themes, which is really what drew the interest of police in the first place, hadn't really changed. He was still writing and drawing about sex and violence and, those type of subjects. Masters went to trial in 1999, and the prosecution relied very heavily on about 1,000 documents and drawings from Tim Masters that were introduced into evidence. So they had over 2,000, but they were only able to get about 1,000 of them in. That's still a lot.
That's a huge amount.
They also relied on the interpretation of some of those drawings and writings and the conclusions reached by Dr. Malloy. During his trial, Sergeant Jim Broderick testified that Tim Masters fit the FBI profile of Peggy Hettrick's killer. And a Larimer County jury convicted Tim Masters of first-degree murder of Peggy Hettrick based on this circumstantial evidence. And he was given a life sentence. Now, if this was True Crime All the Time, Gibbs, this is the point where we would be wrapping up the case. We'd be talking about, aftermath and things that came afterwards. But that's not the case here. Tim Masters appealed his conviction over the next several years. In 2001, his murder conviction was upheld by the Colorado Court of Appeals. And in 2002, his appeal to the Colorado Supreme Court was denied. And these appeals centered around the admission of evidence of these gruesome drawings and writings that he made. His attorneys felt that, that prejudiced the jury against him. I don't know how it couldn't have.
You would have to. If
you were sitting on a jury, this guy's up for murder. Now, keep in mind, they didn't have any physical evidence, but, looking over 1,000 documents that are all centered around sex and violence and the use of a knife. And, you have this woman that was murdered by a knife. She was mutilated. I don't think it was that hard for them to draw that conclusion. Then Masters attempted an appeal based on ineffective counsel. That seems to be pretty popular.
Yeah, I think so. It's the last stance, basically.
At some point in your appeal process, you're going to say, my attorneys were ineffective. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. And this led to the state appointing new attorneys. Then in 2007, these new attorneys began pushing for a new trial. It was based on their argument that Masters' conviction was a result of shoddy police work and the prosecution not providing key evidence to the defense. And specifically, they went after this Jim Broderick. At the time, he was a sergeant back in the day. He testified, he worked the case. He was an investigator, and he testified at Tim's trial. But they stated that Broderick withheld crucial information and that he also perjured himself in the Masters trial. The new attorneys also introduced the theory of another suspect in the case. This is a man by the name of Richard Hammond, who they felt should have been looked at much more closely. But we'll get to him when we discuss other possible suspects. In December 2007, the attorneys for Tim Masters would get to argue their case, that he was unfairly convicted of the murder of Peggy Hettrick. And prosecutors did acknowledge that the defense team did not receive some documents and reports during his trial. Because that was a big part of their accusation, right? They didn't have all of the evidence.
Right.
That they were supposed to have. And prosecutors did admit that was true. They didn't get every single document. But then something big happened the next month in January. DNA test results came back conclusively linking the DNA found on Peggy Hettrick's body
to someone other than Tim Masters. And this was big because special prosecutors moved quickly to vacate his conviction, and the Larimer County Police Department made an announcement that based on this new DNA evidence, they would resume the hunt for Peggy Hettrick's killer. On January 21st of that month, a judge vacated Tim's conviction and he was granted his freedom. And the very next day, they released him.
Just like that?
Just like that, based on this new DNA evidence. Now, the district attorney had to decide whether to retry Tim, but they eventually decided not to and dropped all charges against him. So his conviction was overturned in 2008, but he wouldn't be fully exonerated until 2011. Masters' lead attorney, a guy by the name of David Wymore, would come out and say it's lucky that DNA testing returned viable results, considering how the samples were retrieved from the clothing. But even after all this, Gibbs, prosecutors did not compare the results of their tests to all the suspects who had given DNA samples decades ago. The only thing they said was that Tim Masters was not a match to any of the male DNA found on Hettrick's clothing. But the defense was not going to let that slide. They pushed the DNA comparisons, and ultimately it would come out that the DNA pointed to Peggy Hettrick's former boyfriend, Matt Zellner. So Tim Masters filed a lawsuit against the city of Fort Collins and Larimer County that was ultimately settled for $10 million. Fort Collins paid $5.9 million and Larimer County paid $4.1.
Wow.
In 2010, a couple of years after Masters was released, a grand jury indicted Jim Broderick on 8 counts of perjury. And we talked about this guy. He was an investigator. He was one of the guys that testified at Tim's trial. They alleged that he fabricated the FBI profile on which he testified to in court. Right? I said he testified that Tim Masters matched the FBI profile. Now come to find out that there was no FBI profile. He had made it up. A judge later dismissed the charges, stating that the 3-year statute of limitations on perjury had passed. But just a year later, Broderick was indicted again, this time on 9 charges of perjury, all stemming from the investigation, the arrest, the prosecution, and imprisonment of Tim Masters. And there was a lot of legal wrangling in Broderick's case, but it culminated with all of the charges either being dropped or dismissed by 2013. The entire time from indictment to dismissal took about 3 years. And this entire time, Broderick was on paid administrative leave, but once it was settled, he resigned. But he did get paid for 3 years for doing nothing.
Zero.
Although he was probably spending a lot of that on attorney fees. Maybe.
Probably, yeah.
I don't know if he perjured himself. A grand jury thought there was enough evidence to move forward with the trial. Somebody thought that he had made up this FBI profile. In 2012, Tim Masters released a book called Drawn to Injustice that detailed his life after the murder of Peggy Hettrick. And they also made a documentary about it as well.
Documentary?
A documentary.
It's good stuff.
And you know how much you and I love those documentaries.
Documentary.
All right, we got a couple of suspects to talk about. The first one is Dr. Richard Hammond. And I mentioned him as a name that Masters defense attorneys offered up later on in appeals as a viable suspect. This guy was an eye surgeon and was arrested in 1995 for secretly filming women's genitalia.
Why? I mean, I know why, but...
Because he had a perversion to filming women's genitalia.
The guy's an eye surgeon. Now, this was, 8 years or so after the murder, but apparently, he had cameras that he put in like the ventilation system all over the place.
Really?
And I guess they were pointed in a way that would film women as they sat on the toilet.
What a strange addiction, though.
That is strange. Now, authorities also found a lot of pornography and indications that this guy was obsessed with female genitalia. And I mentioned he was a surgeon. So he had this skill and most likely had the right equipment to perform the mutilations of Peggy Hettrick's body. I'm sure he had a scalpel.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can be a doctor. It depends on what kind you are, but I would think most doctors would have access to a scalpel.
Yeah, I'm sure he could order one if he needed it.
But really the key here was in 1987 when the murder occurred, very much like Tim Masters, Hammond's bedroom window looked out over that same field where Peggy's body was found. And when police went back and looked at him at the time of the murder, they found that he was home that morning, which was very strange for him because it was a day during the week where normally he would have a lot of surgeries scheduled. And the problem with Hammond is he committed suicide in March of 1995, just a few days after he was arrested. Police found Richard Hammond dead in a hotel in Denver. He had used a needle to pump cyanide into his veins.
That's a rough way to go.
It seems like it would be. But he also wrote a suicide note, and in it he said, "My death should satisfy the media's thirst for blood." So I don't know what you make of that, because he's also in the media for having done this
Camera voyeurism.
So
voyeurism.
You can't really look at that and automatically say that it has something to do with the murder of Peggy Hettrick. Number one, it's 8 years later. And number two, he's days removed from probably having his face splashed all over the media for secretly filming women.
Yeah, I'm thinking it had more to do with that.
It sounds like it did, but there are a lot of things about this guy that you would think he should have been looked at. And I think that's the key here, right? Police got so wrapped up in Tim Masters, they got tunnel vision. They really didn't look hard at some of these other people. We're only going to talk about two. I'm sure there were other people that they could have looked harder into and didn't because they were so focused on Masters.
Right.
And we've seen that a lot in these unsolved cases where somebody's convicted, years later they're exonerated, but you can't make up that time of, you can't go back in time and look into possible suspects. Some of that information's not going to be there anymore. But the thing that I found very interesting about the case against Hammond in the Hettrick murder is they really didn't follow up on it after he died. And it was alleged that Jim Broderick, the guy that would be later put up on all these perjury charges, ordered everything they had on Hammond destroyed. So even if they wanted to really look at him, any evidence they had collected was destroyed.
True.
But you have to look at the timeline, right? This is 1995. Masters doesn't get arrested till 98, doesn't go to trial till 99. The information about Richard Hammond was not given to the people that were looking into Masters' case. So the doctor that the prosecution brought in, he didn't know anything about Hammond. The FBI was not told about him. So I thought that was a little strange in the fact that allegedly all the information on him was destroyed.
You're right.
It makes it sound like they were so focused on Masters they didn't want to look at anybody else. That's what it makes it seem like. Now, the second person to talk about is Matthew Zellner. And we talked about him up front. He was the guy that Peggy Hettrick had the on again, off again relationship with.
And we kind of weaved him in and out here and there.
A little bit, yep. He was a used car salesman. He testified at the trial of Tim Masters, and we said he was most likely the last person to see her before she was killed. That came from his own admission, that night at the pub or the bar and grill or whatever you want to call it. He saw Peggy right before she left on foot. Now, what brings Zellner back in, because he was really kind of cleared back in 87, but what brings him back in was the DNA, right? The same DNA that helped free Tim Masters pointed at Matthew Zellner. And it was said that this DNA came from skin cells found on Peggy's clothing. But I said he was a suspect from day one. He was questioned. I believe he even passed a lie detector test. Police searched his apartment, but they did find some items. They took some items out of there, including several knives. The problem with Zellner is that I just couldn't find much about him. Like today, I really couldn't find where, obviously they haven't put anything together on him yet, enough to charge him or arrest him or anything like that. And maybe that's why there's just not that much out there. On the 30th anniversary of Peggy's murder, the Colorado Attorney General's office put out the following statement. Peggy Hettrick's murder remains a Colorado tragedy 30 years later. Her case is very important to the Attorney General's office, and our goal is to find justice for Miss Hettrick, her family, and friends. But they also said in this same statement that this is an ongoing investigation, so it would be inappropriate to comment further at this time. So again, maybe that's why I can't find much information or wasn't able to find much information on Matthew Zellner.
Probably.
After the DNA came out. They already know it's his. They already know it's a match. One of the things I read, Gibbs, and I don't know how reliable it is because I could only find it in one source, but it talked about the fact that where they found the DNA embedded in Peggy's clothing, or where they took it from, was not an area where someone just sitting with her or talking with her would come into contact with that area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes really
like
good
it wasn't
sense.
on her coat or...
There had to be effort to get it there.
Yes. And again, I could only find one source that talked about it. But if that's the case, I think that's something that they're probably looking at. But I think this case is solvable, Gibbs. Much more solvable than many that we talk about. They have physical evidence. They've got some persons of interest. They just need the right break.
Well, and I think with the lately, some of the success with DNA, I think that will or could lend to this being solved sooner than later.
It could, but they've already matched the DNA, But you're right. They've made so many advances in investigative techniques and especially in DNA. To me, though, the tragedy is that authorities spent so many years looking almost exclusively at Tim Masters that a lot of things related to other people, other possible suspects, probably fell through the cracks. And how bad do you feel for Tim Masters? If he really didn't do it, which is what everything seems to point to, how many years of his life did this hang over his head? Not to mention the number of years that he spent in prison.
Oh, yeah. Couldn't imagine.
Now, he did get $10 million, but I'm telling you right now, and I think you and I have talked about this before, I am not giving up a number of years of my freedom for money. There's just no way I'm not doing it. And I did talk about the destruction of some evidence in this case, especially related to Richard Hammond. At the time, Colorado law had no requirement to preserve evidence, which I found very strange. In a large part, due to this case, a law was passed which required the preservation of certain types of evidence, mainly DNA, in any case that resulted in a conviction of a Class 1 felony or sex offense. It has to be preserved for the life of the convicted person, or in cases where no charges have been filed, it has to be kept as long as the investigation is ongoing. And what would an episode be if I didn't talk about Bill Curtis?
Your buddy.
My buddy. You know I talk about him a lot. He profiled this case on his Cold Case Files show in 1999. But this was right after Masters was convicted. But the show was told from the perspective that the case was solved. Well, years later, they found out that that wasn't true. So naturally, this is not an episode that you're going to see in reruns anywhere. You're not going to see this on TV Land or A&E reruns. It's just not going to happen. So you boil down this case. It took them 11 years to put Masters on trial based on the theory that in 1987, a 15-year-old single-handedly ambushed and murdered Peggy Hettrick while she was walking home. He killed her at the curb, which we talked about, then dragged her body 100 yards into the field, then mutilated her breast and genitals. And he did all of this, Gibbs, without leaving any evidence behind. Or probably more importantly, bringing any evidence back to his house. Blood.
15-year-old.
15-year-old. Because we talked about it, right? Police never found any blood. They didn't find body parts, hair, fibers. They didn't find anything that could connect Tim Masters to the crime. He was convicted on the fact that he had a fascination with violence, sex that he put into writings and drawings.
Which today is really strange because you would probably find websites about that kind of stuff.
Oh, I'm sure you would. You can find a website about just about anything, especially when it comes to the sick and twisted. And I think we have more websites about that than we do real websites.
Real, yeah.
Real.
Probably right.
Good websites.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just, it doesn't change the fact that a 37-year-old woman lost her life.
Right.
That's tragic. But then you've got to look at what happened to Tim Masters as another tragedy on top of it.
Well, like you said, you can't trade money for time.
I sure wouldn't.
I mean, you can do it, but it's never the same. It's never the same. $10 million?
$10 million for 10 years? No way. Mm-mm. Now, would I do $1 million for 1 year? No. I wouldn't.
Would you do $10 million for 1 year?
Oh, I don't know. A year's a long time. It goes by pretty quick.
Federal prison. Make it a little easier on you.
Yeah, can I get one of those
or
can I get like a Paul Bernardo type prison suite?
Yeah. How about Rikers Island? 1 year, $10 million, but you get labeled the worst thing possible. You really got to survive to get out of there.
Well, no. Now you're making it. No way. That would be a brutal 1 year. If I could just skate through a year and do my time.
You want to go like one of those financial prison crimes.
I like white collar prison.
Yeah. Where you work in the library, do a couple teaching people some things.
I would really have to think about that.
Now, if it was like that type of prison 1 year.
Now, if you said 30, 40, 50 million, I'm in. 50 million, I'm in.
I mean, if you could go to one of those easy fed prisons where you get your own room, little TV.
Yeah, I want one like in Goodfellas.
Oh,
where I can make my own spaghetti sauce. And
yeah.
Spaghetti
sauce.
Have
that'd
meats
be good.
And garlic and have the guards bring me stuff.
So that wouldn't be bad. You could do a year there, make yourself whatever. And while you're there, it's like a mini vacation. You can go ahead and write your book.
For 50 million, I would do it.
Well, 50 million? Who wouldn't do it?
I don't know.
1 year at a
10 million,
cozy prison?
10 million I'm close to being in. I'm not ready to say I'm
There's a lot of people out there I would do it for a lot less just to not to hear the screaming kids and
My kids are grown though.
Yeah.
Not grown, but they're old enough to. Although they do still scream sometimes and fight.
They're a riot, man.
Yeah, they're something.
Every time I come over here for dinner, man, they crack me up.
It's drama. There's drama.
It's free entertainment, and it's really good entertainment.
Yeah. When you live in a house with 3 women, a female dog, there's drama.
Yeah.
Sometimes the dog has drama.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's highlight of my
of your week.
Of my week sometimes.
Yeah, but that is the case of Peggy Hettrick. I do believe, Gibbs, that we'll be reading about this. We'll get we'll get an alert that says this one's been solved. I don't know how long it'll take.
I agree with you.
But it's very solvable.
Yeah, I think so.
I believe it is. All right, we got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's listen.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Lindsay from New Jersey. I'm a relatively new listener, so I still have some catching up to do, but I just listened to the Unsolved episode on the Cleveland torso murderer. I just wanted to let you know that the word I think you were looking for as a synonym for a hobo stick is a bindle, B-I-N-D-L-E. I hope that helps because I hate it when there's a word on the tip of my brain and I can't think of it. Anyway, thank you so much for all your hard work and the fantastic content. I will definitely keep listening and keep your own time ticking.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Ketty Seth from Milford, Connecticut. I'm just calling to let you know that I was listening to your podcast on the Cleveland torso murderers, and I wanted to let you know that the little bundle on a stick that you were talking about with the hobos that would ride the rails is called a bindle. I repeat, it's a bindle. Okay? Just so you know, for future reference. And I love what you guys are doing. I love your show. I listen every chance I can. So, keep it going and keep your own time ticking. Bye-bye.
So that was a first. I had to put two together.
You did.
Because they were about the exact same subject. You know what's really funny is I was watching one of my favorite shows. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I love that show. I just watch it over and over. And there is an episode where Charlie and Mac are going to run away. And Charlie is making a bindle.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I watched it right after we did the episode. And he's like, I don't know how hobos get all their stuff in this little
how they put it all in
handkerchief or whatever. But, we always appreciate people reaching out and telling us what we cannot remember at the time.
Bindle on a stick.
Bindle. A 3-second Google search would have fixed that, but that's against our rules.
Then we'd have to type it up.
First of all, your voicemail greeting sounds ultra depressed. Second of all, my name's Emily. Hi. I listen to your podcast, both of them. I'm almost done with both of them already, and it's driving me crazy. I just wanted to call and tell you both that, first of all, you're amazing. Mike, stop worrying about what people think of, when you say fascinating or interesting. It is interesting. Just because it's a terrible crime doesn't make it not interesting that people can have the capability of doing the things they do. And try to lay off Gibby a little bit with his grammar, both of you. I caught you, Mike. I caught you slipping a couple times. But I really appreciate the podcast. Listening to it has really got me through a lot. I've just moved, and it's a very hard transition, working by myself and not knowing anybody. So having this podcast to listen to can make me feel like a person sometimes. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing and keep your own time ticking. Thanks.
All right, Gibbs, there's a lot there. So I don't worry about me saying the word interesting or fascinating. What I did have a hard time with in the beginning of the podcast was learning that I said the word as interesting. I did have an issue with that, not from people pointing it out, from the fact that I didn't know that I said it that way.
You say so many things the wrong way.
I do.
If you
would just only, help me out, man. Catch me on it.
If you let me tutor you.
Well, good thing we got this Grammarly now for...
oh, that's true.
That's helping out big time.
Big time. I'm going to be you just watch and see what happens to me.
The problem is they don't have Grammarly for the spoken word, right? There's nothing in my head that will autocorrect the things that are coming out of my mouth.
Well, I got that same problem.
Yeah.
Wait, you didn't have to laugh that way.
No, I thought about saying both of us, and then I was trying to lay off you for a minute.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Marion from Fort Worth, Texas. And I'm calling about the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I just started listening, and I started at the beginning. So I've gotten up to episode 25. And I think this is the first time that you guys included a phone number for a tip line in case anyone had information. And I was thinking that with all of the Unsolved podcast episodes, that would be a great idea. If the purpose of the podcast is to bring attention to a cold case, and you discuss it for an hour, it would be great to have a phone number at the end in case someone listening does have some information. Just a suggestion. And also I have a request. I'd love for you to cover the 1966 unsolved murder of Valerie Percy in the Chicago area in Illinois. Thanks, and keep up the great work. Bye.
All right, we appreciate that. It is a very good idea.
Yeah.
I didn't do it in this case either, but I think we only did it probably the one time. But it wouldn't be hard to find those numbers.
The tip numbers?
Yeah. I'm going to put you in charge of that.
Yeah, I'm on it.
All right.
1-800-GOT-TIPS.
Call Gibby.
G'day, Mike and old mate. It's Matt from Melbourne. I just discovered podcasts 2 weeks ago. Search crime, you came up, and now I'm addicted. So thanks, it's been great. I'd love you to have a look at a case down here, one of Jennifer Tanner, who was murdered in the 1980s. Everyone knows who killed her, but the crime's never been officially solved. Maybe you boys can do it. Gibby, I'd just like to say we're all very impressed down here with your grasp of our language and the knowledge of our culture. And if you'd both like to come down and investigate the Jennifer Tanner case a bit closer, then we'll show you some good old Aussie hospitality. So you all stay safe and keep your own time ticking. Cheers.
Boy, he was just trying to talk like he was from the South there a little bit towards the end.
Well, I know, but so what's funny is his American accent.
Oh, no.
Much better than your Aussie accent.
Really, mate?
That wasn't bad.
Or you going to do that to me?
That wasn't good. When I say it wasn't bad, then you go with another one that's not as good.
You're saying I should stop where I was?
Yeah. He actually, that was like English or something.
That was like Crocodile Dundee.
No, that was from the UK. He actually had a really good Australian accent. You know, I've talked a couple times about...
Well, he's from Australia.
No, but I mean the different areas of Australia. People sound different.
Oh, yes.
To me, that is an Australian accent.
Like from Queensland.
I don't know. But when I hear it,
yeah,
that is what I think of as an Australian accent, even though I know in different parts of Australia they have different
And I think
accents.
that's why it's hard to understand mine, because I come from the South Island, where it's made up of many different...
Are you doing an accent now, or are you...
Oh, yes. It comes and goes. It's just like the water comes and washes away the sand.
I don't know what you're even attempting.
It's the accent. That's all you need to know.
It's just a Gibby accent.
No, it's from that part of the world, yes.
It's not from Australia.
It's from the island.
Oh, all right. On that note, we're going to get out of here. That is another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.